Hey, gang. Welcome to Chapter 5, Lesson number 1, where we're going to be talking about imperialism. And specifically, when we talk about imperialism, what we're talking about here is the building of empires. And that's really what I want you to understand, that we're going to be talking about throughout all of this chapter how it is that you build empires. And there's a couple of key things here, at least in the timeline that we're talking about, which is going to run from, as I'm putting up here in the upper right-hand corner, that's going to run from about, give or take, 1870 to about 1900 during this chapter. This timeline of building empires is really going to be kind of like the foreign policy time of what we talk about during the Second Industrial Revolution. Remember that we talked about the Gilded Age, the Second Industrial Revolution, as running pretty much during the same timeline, right? That America, during chapters 3 and chapters 4, was kind of building its industry up at home during this Gilded Age, Second Industrial Revolution. And now we're going to take a look at the foreign policy perspective of this when we take a look at this issue of building an empire. And it's called imperialism, when a country kind of leaves its home base and goes out into the world and creates its own empire. So we'll take a look here today at 3 different things, as you can see up here in the corner with the slide that I'm moving around. We're going to be taking a look at searching for new markets. So there's almost like an economic reason behind this. And there's also, besides just economies, there's also a reason to protect what it is you're building. So we're also going to take a look at something called protectorates. And then we're going to add into that and talk about the idea that motivates us, because countries don't just wake up one day and be like, let's go build an empire. That's a brilliant idea. Yeah. It's more like that there's a part of our culture or a part of who we are that lets us get out there and lets us really kind of embrace that idea of building an empire. And we're going to talk about that with our country and with other countries as well during this section. So let's begin our conversation here by taking a look at kind of what imperialism is and a little bit more of a nitty-gritty kind of point of view. And imperialism really is a bit more. So let's start this conversation that we have with imperialism by taking a look at kind of the situation of the world at the time, what imperialism is in a little bit more detail, and how we're going to see imperialism start to spread around the world and making ultimately its way to America. So the first step is understanding kind of what imperialism is, how imperialism works, what it is that countries hope to do with imperialism. And what we want to take a look at here is the slide right here in front, which is a desire for new markets. And what this really means here when we take a look at imperialism is when one nation wants to find a way to dominate another. And there's lots of ways you can do that here. And today we're going to take a look at 2 different ways that a nation could dominate another. We're going to take a look at political domination, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do political domination. That could be military, it could be economics, whatever that might be, or economic domination of a stronger nation over a weaker one. So imperialism comes in lots of shapes or sizes. It can be treaties, it can be invasions, it can be bullying with your military, it could be economies. It really kind of comes in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. And I think the image here, or the cartoon that we have, that I think really kind of helps us understand what it is that we're looking at, would be this one right here, where it says you've got 2 countries. Essentially, one country here on the left is France. This is France. And on the right, you've got Napoleon, you've got Britain. And they're carving up the world. And this is what you're going to begin to see starting really as early as the 1700s. And even earlier than that, when the countries of Europe begin to carve up the rest of the world. I mean, how do you think America got here, right? We're a colony of Britain. They carved up part of this continent, and they took it over. So we're going to see this kind of carving up of the world, and it's going to happen militarily, it's going to happen politically, it's going to happen economically. And the big motivator for countries at the time to do this, the one thing that's really going to kind of drive these countries forward to kind of really make them want to get involved in carving up the world, that's going to be this issue of new markets. And Europe is going to be in a real need for new places to sell their goods and materials that they're making at home. because tariffs had reduced trade among those nations of the world in Europe. And the same thing's going to happen here at home in America as well. So what happens in Europe here at the beginning of the 1870s is also going to eventually happen in America. That's kind of why we're starting with this concept. So let me show you this map that we have here that gives us, I think, a pretty good understanding of what it is we're looking at. And you can see it here in the upper right. Here are the nations of Europe, and these nations have set up different tariffs around their countries. So here you have Britain. I just circled Britain for you. You've got France, you've got Germany, you've got Austria-Hungary, you've got Italy, Russia. Each of them has placed so many taxes on the goods of the countries that are near them that they're not able to import anything because every other country is setting such high tariffs that you can only sell to your own people. So anything that's made in Britain can only be sold in Britain because France has placed such high tariffs on it, because Germany has, Austria-Hungary has, Russia has. Anything made in Britain can only be sold there because every other country placed tariffs on it. And that same lesson happens in every one of these other countries. France does the same thing. France can only sell its goods in France because Britain put tariffs on French goods and Russian and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to find new places to sell your goods if the only place you can sell them is at home, or else your economy's never going to grow. And that would be a bad thing. So in order to overcoming this kind of industrialization, kind of crippling countries' abilities to sell to any place else, you're going to go looking for these new markets. And you're going to go looking for them all around the world. Where do you find those places? Well, I'll give you a really good example. You can find those places, in this case, as a great example, in Africa. And in Africa, what you end up with here would be an entire continent. We're not talking about like a little state like Pennsylvania. We're talking about the whole freaking continent. The whole continent is carved up and claimed by different countries. So on this map that I'm moving around right now, you can see the different colors. Green standing for the French, pink for the British. The Germans are kind of like this, like pale yellow. The Portuguese are even in on the game. The Belgians, they have all carved up this land. And in this land, they're looking to sell the goods they make back home. So there's a reason why you see France take all these countries, because they want to sell their goods. Britain, same thing. They want to sell the goods they make back home in these other countries, in these other places. So as this kind of begins to expand around the world, what you end up seeing with by 1914 is a world that has been completely and utterly carved up. I mean, check out this map, right? I mean, look at it. Everywhere around the world, just about, has been carved up and claimed by someone else. Almost all of Africa is carved up. Huge portions of Asia have been carved up. America, of course, is carved up. There's very few places left on Earth where a bigger power hasn't kind of wielded its influence or control over a weaker one. That's imperialism. It's a world full of empires. So what do you do once you get these countries, right? What do you do once you've managed to somehow bring all of these economies into the fold? And the answer there is, well, to protect them. So all these countries of the world that are involved, France, Austria-Hungary, Germany, Italy, they all want to find a way to protect what it is that they've created. So what do? You create this thing called a protectorate. And the concept of a protectorate here, it's pretty simple. You're saying, all right, let's take a look here at this little country in Africa. We'll bring this map of Africa back, right? All right, let's say we're British, and what we say is, all right, Anglo, Egypt, Sudan, you can be in control of your own place. Right? You can run the show there in your own little area in Africa, but you have to do what we tell you to do. You're allowed to remain independently in control, but if we tell you to do something, you got to do it. It's kind of like at home, like when, as a parent, you give those false choices to kids. You're like, okay, sweetheart, you have two choices. Now you can make a choice. You have two choices. Choice one is to pick all these things up, or choice two is I throw them all away. I mean, it's a choice, right? I'm letting my kids make that decision. But if they don't make the decision that I want, pick them all up, they're going to get punished. That's essentially what a protectorate is. All of these places that you see around the world that have been taken over by all of these other countries, a lot of them are protectorates. They can do what they want to do, but if they disobey, they're going to get punished. So, America is going to find itself, as 1870, 1880, 1890 approaches, wondering just how much of the world is left to carve up, right? Just how much of the world is left to carve up. And we're going to try and find a way for our own nation to get in there and kind of make some changes and stake a claim to the world. So as you take a look here, like what is America going to do to get involved in all of this? We go back to that essential question, and how are empires built? And I think what you're going to see here is that we need an idea that's going to get Americans up and moving and drive us to dominate. Something that's going to kind of wake us up one day and be like, all right, America, you got to get out there, right? You got to do something about this, right? You got to find a way to get out there, and you've got to help us. Because remember, let's go back to last chapter. There's a couple of things we talked about last chapter that were really impacting America's economy. And this idea that kind of gets us pushing out there, it's going to be in response to that. One of those things was tariffs. If you remember, farmers and the populist movement desperately wanted those tariffs because those tariffs could help farmers overcome the really bad economy and maybe help them sell a little bit more. It didn't work out that way, but there was a really difficult time for farmers trying to get the stuff that they made out there and sold. So America is really going to be looking for new places to sell its own goods because it's putting tariffs on all of those goods coming from Europe. So that was one thing we talked about last chapter that still is going to be a factor here. Remember, one of the main motivating factors for Europeans was to find new markets to sell stuff because all the tariffs on all the countries in Europe divided those places up and made it so you could only sell at home. Well, we've kind of done the same thing. We put all these tariffs in play for farmers, and now we can only sell here at home. We have to find other places to sell our goods. That's one thing. And we mentioned what happens once you find those places, right? When you find those places, then you have to protect them. You have those protectorates. So we kind of have in America a need to find some place to sell our goods. Let's not forget, too, that we are in the second industrial revolution that starts in 1870 and runs to about 1900. So we need some place to sell all of our goods, especially if Europe has put all of those tariffs on other goods, preventing people from selling there. And let's not forget that thing we talked about 2 chapters ago in chapter 3, which is that by 1900, America has the largest gross national product on the planet. We're selling, or we're making more than anyone else on the entire planet. So, what does this mean for us as Americans? What does it allow us to do? What we're going to take a look here is how those factors motivate us to go finding places to dominate. All right? So, here's that map of the world that we saw on the last slide. And what I've done here is I've highlighted those places where Americans really have a chance at expanding to sell goods made in the second industrial revolution during the Gilded Age because the rest of the world is off limits. And your answer there is Latin America, Central America, Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, the Caribbean, those beautiful islands out there in the Caribbean, and China, and the Pacific Islands. I mean, Japan, these are the places that are left. These are the places that America could reach out and sell its own goods that it's making here elsewhere around the world. So let's see kind of how that takes place. Let's see kind of how that occurs. So ultimately what you end up looking at here is going to be this concept of manifest destiny. And manifest destiny is this concept that our nation is destined to expand, to go from America to big, gargantuan America. And this kind of spreading out, this kind of doing that, is geared by this concept of manifest destiny. The thought behind here is that our civilization is a great thing. And over the coming days, we're going to study a couple of things that really prove this. You're going to see, after the Spanish-American War, America in 1898 becoming an actual empire. We, and most Americans don't know this, had an actual empire with colonies and protectorates all over the globe. And we're going to kind of embrace that imperialistic idea of spreading our civilization from one side of the world to the other. It's a big deal that America decides to do this. I mean, and you can see this cartoon right here of the Spanish-American War that's pretty clear, right? In 1898, Spanish-American War is just over, and you can see it right down here on the right-hand side, right beneath my little finger, right down there. There it is, right underneath my finger. And you can see the American eagle. Here it is, spreading our civilization, the beacons, the rays of light that you can see right down there above the eagle. 10,000 miles from tip to tip, from Puerto Rico here in the east of the world all the way over here to the Philippines. America's going to spread her civilization. And if you think that this is like just a new idea, it's really not a new idea. It's an idea that's been around a long time. We're going to take a look at this picture in class in more detail tomorrow. Her name is Columbia, and what I want you to think of as we're kind of finishing up this next version of the video is how is this image right here a symbol of us spreading our civilization, not just westward across our continent, but across the entire world eventually. How are we spreading our civilization? So that's what we're looking at, and what we will be looking at as we kind of spread out, that manifest destiny allows us to do that. The other thing that we're going to take a look at here tomorrow in class is this graph, and how does this graph represent our economic imperialism, our domination of other nations of the world based upon our economy, with exports in dark blue and imports in light blue. So we're going to take a look at those tomorrow in class, but I wanted to give you a preview of them here. Let's take a look in more detail at how it is and where exactly we make that expansion to find new markets to sell our products, to create our protectorates, and spread our civilization thanks to manifest destiny. So knowing that it's going to be this idea of manifest destiny that kind of drives us to expand from one side of the continent to the other and then spread our civilization out into the world, now we're going to take a look at how it is that we actually kind of dominate it. And up here in the upper right-hand corner, just to the right of me, you can see a couple of things up here. You can see, as you're looking, that we are going to embrace imperialism by dominating the weak and looking for new markets in places like Japan, by adding territories, protectorates like Hawaii. So let's detail some of these things for you so it makes a little bit more sense. As America is kind of getting itself underway, kind of just getting itself ready to go, it's going to stop at Japan. It's kind of our introduction into imperialism. And we're going to do more work with this tomorrow in class, but know that what we're really talking about here when we get to Japan is taking a country that is closed off. Japan is like, I don't want anyone to come in here. Please don't come in and see me. I can peek out and see you. Hello? But you can't come in and trade with me. We don't want you in here. Japan is what's called isolationist. And we are going to sail our ships in, and this is, by the way, this image right here that I'm blowing up. I'll bring it to the front so you can see it while we're talking about this. This image is called a black ship. This is a Japanese depiction of our ships entering Japan and taking them from that closed off, I don't want to trade with you mentality, I don't want to know you, I don't want to be a part of you, stay away from my culture, and saying, too bad, man. You have to trade with America. We bring our ships in here, these black ships as the Japanese call them, and we tell them, you're going to trade with us? And they say, no, we're not. And we say, oh, yeah, you are. You're going to trade with us? Watch this. And we take our ships and we go into port and we point them over a Japanese village. And we say, watch what our ships can do. And we launch cannons over this village. And the Japanese go, oh, I get the message. Either I sign this Treaty of Kanagawa and give you trading rights at 2 ports in Japan, or you're going to blow us up. And when they agree to sign this Treaty of Kanagawa and give us 2 trading ports to bring our goods in and sell our goods, that's America's kind of real first example of imperialism, where we really kind of make an attempt to force another country to buy the goods that we produce. But we have to remember something. Like, Japan is on the other side of the world, right? Like, here's America, and here's Japan, and you have to go by ship, like, all the way across the ocean to do that, right? So, what do ships run on at the time? They don't run on oil. It's too early for that. They run on coal. So we need to find places in the Pacific Ocean where we're going to be able to resupply our ships, give them some coal, and send them on their way. So we're going to look for places where we can expand into the Pacific, because our trade is growing with Asia, right? We just pointed out that now we are, in fact, trading in Japan. So if we're trading up here in Japan, we also need to find places to resupply our vessels. So we're going to look for a place that we can find a territory, a protectorate, where we can really establish a resupply. And Hawaii is going to become that place. And our expansion into Hawaii is absolutely crucial. Hawaii at the time was an independent kingdom, was currently, at the time, run by a queen named Queen Liliuokalani. And Liliuokalani did not like the way that American sugar planters were taking advantage of her country, her economy, her people. So she began to try and restrict America's rights to Hawaii. So think of it kind of the reverse of Japan. Here you have the nation of Hawaii, which is pretty open to America, pretty open to producing sugarcane there, pretty open to trading with us. And then Queen Liliuokalani says, I don't like the way you're treating us. I'm going to start to close this off. I'm going to make it harder for you to trade with us in Hawaii. And the sugar planters begin to rebel against Queen Liliuokalani, and she's winning until American Marines begin to support the sugar planters. Coincidence? I think not. So that what you find here by 1893 is that Queen Liliuokalani has been overthrown by sugar planters with the help of American Marines, and who would have guessed it? They're friendly to the United States. And it only takes us, 5 years to 1898, where we annex Hawaii and make it an official protectorate, an official territory of the United States. And now, we got that resupply base! Awesome! So we can trade better with places like Japan and the rest of the world. The other big place that we're going to want to grow, and if you remember that map from the previous slide, let me see if I can bring it back up here really quick. That map from the previous slide showed that there were only a few places out there that were left that we were able or going to be able to actually do the trading, right? And I highlighted those places for you. China, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Japan, we did talk about, people in the Pacific, Hawaii, and I said the Caribbean and the Americas. So America is going to turn its attention, now that it's secured Hawaii and Japan and some of the Pacific Islands, it's going to turn its attention to Latin America. Because Latin America was doing something that we didn't really like. Latin America was buying all of its goods from Europe. That means that all these countries in Europe were able to sell its goods to Latin America. Well, why are they buying from Europe? Why not buy us? See, here's the problem. We were buying raw materials from Latin America to produce things in our factories, but they weren't buying our goods back. When we want to sell our goods back to Latin America, Europe's like, oh, no. you're not welcome here, so hit the road. And we don't have the ability to sell back. So we want to try to find a way to erase this trade with Europe and replace it with trade from America. That's the goal anyway. So we start to advocate a new idea. We call it Pan-Americanism. We say, hey, Latin America, you should really be our friends. You should help us out. You should buy from us, not from Europe. But think about it. How's that going to go over really, right? Is it really going to go over? I don't think it's really going to go over so well. Because if you think about it, they've got the example of Hawaii or of Japan. They've got the example of Hawaii. And they know that if we get ourselves in there, we're going to start to treat them like a protectorate too. So they actually deny us access. They say, no. And it's going to take us about 30 years, not until after 1900, that we really get a foothold in Latin America and lay claim to that region as our own. So we'll talk about this more in class tomorrow. Hopefully you got a good video here at least to kind of think of, and we'll build from there.